The cruelest kind of disrespect in a bank is the kind that arrives smiling, because smiling means the person humiliating you expects to look reasonable while they do it. Adrian Cole had built his company carefully enough that every number in his life had a paper trail. That was not an accident. Black men with money learn early that wealth does not protect you from suspicion. Sometimes it invites it. The wrong car, the wrong watch, the wrong account balance, the wrong confidence at the wrong desk, and suddenly some clerk with half your education and none of your risk starts acting like your existence requires extra explanation. So when the young woman at the private banking counter looked at his withdrawal request, looked up at him, and said, "Sir, accounts like this usually require the actual owner to appear in person," Adrian did not raise his voice. He just set his hand flat on the marble and asked, "Do you hear yourself? Before we get into it, tell me where you're watching from today. And if you enjoy stories about dignity, justice, and moments when receipts make liars very quiet, subscribe and stay with me." The branch sat on the corner of Wilcox and Grand in a tower where the glass always looked cleaner than ordinary people's windows. It was one of Bellstone National's flagship wealth management locations, the kind of place designed to reassure rich clients that their money was being kept in a more tasteful atmosphere than everybody else's. There were private offices with frosted walls, quiet carpets, good coffee, and people in fitted navy suits who said your name like a favor if they believed you belonged there. Adrian Cole belonged there. He was 41, broad-shouldered, composed, with the kind of calm expensive people often assume belongs naturally to white men and looked suspiciously rehearsed on black men. He had built a commercial packaging company from one leased machine and a warehouse sublet into a seven-figure operation with contracts across 3 states. He employed 38 people, paid them on time, bought his mother a house in Hampton, and understood tax law better than half the branch staff probably understood their own HR manuals. He was not flashy. He did not need to be. His confidence came from risk survived, payroll met, and years of watching institutions doubt him right up until his paperwork made them embarrassed. He was at Bellstone that Thursday because a land purchase was closing by 5. One of his suppliers had finally decided to sell a warehouse lot Adrian had wanted for 3 years, and the seller's attorney needed a cashier's check that afternoon. The money was already in his Bellstone business reserve account. The documentation had been sent the day before. His assistant had confirmed the branch appointment. Everything was clean. All Adrian needed was the check. He stepped into the Wealth Services lobby at 2:14 p.m., signed in, and took a seat beneath a wall of abstract art meant to signal taste instead of just cost. 2 older white men in golf jackets sat near the coffee station talking softly about muni bonds. A blonde woman in cream trousers was arguing with someone on speakerphone about Aspen. Near the far desk, a younger white banker laughed too hard at something a client had barely said. Then the clerk called his name. "Mr. Cole?" He stood and followed her to the private transaction counter. Her name tag said Kelsey Morgan. White, maybe 27, immaculate ponytail, pale pink nails, fitted blazer, the kind of polished junior employee still learning how to sound powerful by borrowing the bank's caution and wearing it too aggressively. Adrian had seen her type in law offices, airport lounges, and boardroom receptions. They were often perfectly civil until a black man walked in with enough authority to interrupt their assumptions. Kelsey smiled the professional smile first. "How can I help you today?" "I'm here for the cashier's check on file under Cole Industrial Solutions," Adrian said. $280,000. Closing disbursement." Kelsey typed. Clicked. Paused. Her face changed almost imperceptibly. Not confusion. Recognition mixed with resistance. "Do you have identification?" He handed over his driver's license and business authorization card. She looked at both longer than necessary, then back at the screen. "Just a moment." Adrian waited. She typed again, then frowned in the way people frown when their certainty and the facts are starting to disagree but they haven't yet decided which one they trust more. "I'm seeing the request," she said slowly, "but this account has high-level release restrictions." "Yes," Adrian said. "That's why I'm here in person." She glanced up at him again. Then came the sentence. "Sir, accounts like this usually require the actual owner to appear in person." The room did not go silent. That would have been too dramatic. It just tightened. The older men by the coffee station stopped talking. The blonde woman on speakerphone lowered the phone an inch. The younger banker at the far desk glanced over and then, realizing something social might be happening, pretended not to. Adrian looked at Kelsey for one full second. Then he placed his palm flat on the counter. Do you hear yourself? Kelsey blinked. I'm sorry. You just told me accounts like this require the actual owner to appear. He tapped the authorization card once. I am the owner. Her smile returned, thinner now. I only mean we have to be careful with large disbursements. No, Adrian said. You meant what you said the first time. Kelsey stiffened. Sir, there's no need to be confrontational. There it was. The old move. A black man naming disrespect becomes the source of tension rather than the target of it. Adrian kept his voice calm. He had too much money moving through too many institutions to lose composure at the first little clerk who confused whiteness with fraud detection. I'm not confrontational, he said. I'm specific. There's a difference. She looked back at the screen. This account is attached to a business entity. Sometimes authorized signers try to process disbursements outside their approved range. Adrian actually laughed once. Not because anything was funny. Because she had shifted so quickly from owner denial to signer suspicion that the structure of her thinking had become visible. He said, "Open the corporate profile." Kelsey hesitated. Excuse me? Open the corporate profile. For a second she simply looked at him, annoyed now that he was speaking in the grammar of her system instead of the uncertain tone she expected from customers being quietly diminished. Then she said, I know how to navigate our platform. Adrian gave her a small, humorless smile. Then go to the ownership file. That landed harder than it should have. Because competence from the person she had already demoted in her head felt like resistance, not clarification. Kelsey exhaled through her nose. If you'd like, I can get my supervisor. Yes, Adrian said. Do that. He did not say please. Not because he had forgotten manners. Because men like Adrian learn early that no amount of softness can save you from people who have already decided your money looks borrowed. The supervisor came in under 2 minutes. White, male, mid-40s, graying temples, conservative tie, name tag reading Brent Lawson. He moved with the steady assurance of someone who had spent years smoothing branch problems and thought most of them began with customers failing to appreciate policy. Kelsey said there was a concern, he said. Adrian looked at him. No. Kelsey had a concern. I have a transaction. Brent gave a patient little nod, the kind that meant he had already classed Adrian as difficult enough to manage but not yet enough to fear. All right, he said. Let's slow down and figure out what's needed. I already know what's needed, Adrian replied. A cashier's check that your office confirmed yesterday. What I need from you is an explanation for why your clerk told me the actual owner needed to appear after I already identified myself as the owner. Brent looked at Kelsey briefly. Kelsey, to her credit or cowardice, did not repeat the line exactly. She softened it immediately. I was simply clarifying elevated account controls. Of course. That is how these things always go. The insult arrives clearly and gets translated into policy language the second authority enters the room. Adrian saw Brent register the opening and step into it. Well, Brent said, for transactions of this size, we do sometimes perform ownership verification. Good, Adrian said. Verify it. Brent nodded as though that were the reasonable part of this rather than something they should have done before implying he didn't belong at his own account. He clicked into the branch terminal himself. Name. Entity. Account structure. Approval chain. Then his eyes flicked once, quickly, over the screen. Adrian saw it. That tiny shift. The one that says the facts have already landed but the man reading them has not yet decided how gracefully he plans to recover. Brent cleared his throat. Mr. Cole, I do see you listed here. Adrian said nothing. Because listed here was already a retreat from actual owner. Brent continued, the account history is substantial, so let's just make sure we process the release correctly. Adrian leaned slightly on the counter. No, he said. Let's make sure we describe the problem correctly. Kelsey had gone very still now. The blonde woman with the speakerphone had abandoned the call entirely and was now openly listening. One of the older men by the coffee station turned his body fully toward the counter with the serene interest of a retired man who finally had something worth watching. Brent tried again. There was a miscommunication. Adrian shook his head once. There was an assumption. Brent's face held. Good training. But his eyes betrayed him for half a second. Enough to confirm what Adrian already knew. He had walked into the branch with the right documents, the right appointment, the right account, the right balance, and still the first instinct waiting for him had been to imagine that a black man requesting 6 figures from a private account probably needed closer scrutiny than the file itself required. That was the insult. Not the pause. The presumption beneath it. "Print the ownership page," Adrian said. Brent blinked. "I'm sorry." "Print the ownership page." Now the room really did go quieter. Because public proof has a different texture from private correction. Private correction lets people save face. Printing the page meant everybody in earshot would see exactly how wrong the room had been. Brent hesitated. Adrian kept his eyes on him. "Print it." The printer whirred behind the desk. Kelsey shifted her weight. Brent tore off the page. Looked at it once. Then, perhaps deciding there was no clean way around the moment anymore, slid it across the marble. Adrian picked it up. At the top, under corporate ownership and control, it listed, Adrian Cole, 92% beneficial owner, primary signatory, authorized for full disbursement, clean. Simple. Merciless. He held the sheet in his hand for 1 second. Then said, not loudly, "Read it." Brent's jaw moved. "Mr. Cole, I think we're past." "No," Adrian said. "Read it." The old men near the coffee station were now pretending not to hear while hearing every word. The younger banker at the far desk had stopped typing entirely. Kelsey stared at the counter as if eye contact itself had become dangerous. Brent understood then that this wasn't about the check anymore. It was about the room. And the room deserved to hear what was on the screen before any manager got to call it a misunderstanding and bury the sharp edges under polished procedure. He looked at the paper. Then said, Adrian Cole. 92% beneficial owner. Primary signatory. Authorized for full disbursement. Good. Adrian set the page back down and said, now pull the transaction history. Brent frowned. For what purpose? So we can see how long I've been important enough for your systems to know exactly who I am. That line landed like a quiet slap. Because now even the people with no knowledge of banking could understand the shape of what had happened. Kelsey opened her mouth as if to object, then thought better of it. Brent clicked again, likely hoping the screen would not reveal anything more dramatic than a few routine business deposits. Instead, the account history lit up in full. Quarterly tax transfers. Vendor payroll. Equipment financing payoff. Property escrow deposits. Municipal contract receipts. Wire confirmations with balances large enough to make everybody at the counter a little more still. Adrian did not need to say much after that. The history was doing beautiful work. Years of it. Years of activity. Years of profitable business. Years of this exact bank gladly holding his money while one clerk and one supervisor found sudden caution only when he asked to use it in person. One of the old men near the coffee station murmured, well, I'll be. The blonde woman gave Kelsey a look so openly disapproving it almost qualified as solidarity, though Adrian had lived too long to confuse spectator shame with courage. Brent shut the screen down too quickly. Too late. Adrian said, looks like the account exists too. Kelsey flushed. Brent looked at him with a mix of apology and irritation, the expression of a man annoyed that he had been forced to learn his lesson publicly. We can have the check prepared in 5 minutes, Brent said. Adrian smiled then, but there was no warmth in it. No, he said. You can prepare it now. And while you do that, I'd like the private banking director's name. Kelsey finally found her voice. Sir, that won't be necessary. He turned to her. Necessary was the part before your sentence. This is consequences. That shut her up. Brent wrote down a name. Then another. Then added a direct line. Adrian watched the check being printed, watched the signatures placed, watched the envelope sealed, and did not help either of them feel better with forced graciousness. He signed the final receipt and took the envelope. Then, before turning away, he looked at Brent and said the sentence he knew would stay. The dangerous thing about this kind of humiliation is that you call it caution afterward, as if caution just happened to wake up when I walked in. No one answered. Because no one could. He walked out of Bellstone National at 2:37 p.m. with the cashier's check in one hand and enough anger under his ribs to stay hot all evening. Not because he had lost. Because he had won something that should never have been fought over. The warehouse closed on time. The seller's attorney got paid. Business continued. That is the thing about black excellence in America, it often has to keep producing while still bleeding from what institutions make it prove. But Adrian did not let the branch off with a finished transaction in a private grudge. That night he wrote the complaint. Names. Time. Desk number. Exact wording. Ownership page. Transaction history. Witnesses. Appointment confirmation from the day before. He attached a photo of the printed ownership document in the branch envelope containing the check. He copied the regional private banking director, corporate conduct office, and his business attorney for good measure. By noon the next day, Bellstone called. Not a customer service line. Not a generic apology box. The private banking director herself. White woman. Crisp voice. Immediate seriousness. Mr. Cole, I've reviewed the preliminary report, and I'd like to apologize directly. He sat in his office, looked out at the loading yard where forklifts were moving pallets in clean practice lines, and said, "For which part?" There was a pause. "Good." Then she said, "For your authority being questioned in a way our records did not support." "Better." "Still not enough." "But better." He agreed to meet. The meeting happened 3 days later in a conference room on the 23rd floor of Bellstone's regional headquarters. The private banking director. The branch supervisor. A conduct officer. Kelsey was not there. Adrian noticed that too. Institutions love protecting junior employees from the full weight of the harm they help stage if that harm might become a learning experience for someone more important. He walked them through the incident once. Calmly. Completely. No wasted drama. The conduct officer asked whether he believed race was a factor. Adrian almost laughed. "Do you have a more creative explanation?" he asked. No one answered. Because that was the thing about polished discrimination. It leaves very little behind except pattern, instinct, and the strange way systems become suddenly uncertain only when you show up in the wrong body with the right authority. Bellstone disciplined both employees. Revised branch procedures. Required ownership profile review before escalated challenge at private banking counters. Added mandatory signatory verification training. And, less officially but more importantly, started treating Adrian like the kind of client they should have recognized from the first second. Again, too late. Again, familiar. Weeks later, at another Bellstone branch in another city, a teller greeted him with immediate professionalism and said, "Good afternoon, Mr. Cole. I see your profile. We've prepared the paperwork." It should have felt normal. Instead it felt like evidence. Evidence that the original humiliation had never been necessary. Only chosen. The version most people would tell was simple. A bank clerk tried to humiliate the black entrepreneur. The account history lit up. He proved them wrong. But the truer version was this. A black businessman walked into a bank that knew his money, knew his company, knew his signature, and knew his authority. A white clerk and her supervisor still found reason to question him before they bothered to question the system. They treated ownership like a claim until the screen made it impossible to deny. And only when the account history lit up in front of witnesses did the room finally stop behaving as if his confidence required extra proof. That is what prejudice often looks like around wealth. Not crude rejection. Not open insult. Sometimes just a polished little suspicion, a smile, and a sentence designed to make you feel like your own success arrived under someone else's name. Until the history lights up on the screen. And then suddenly everyone can see that the real issue was never whether the account belonged to him. It was how quickly they needed him not to. If this story moved you, like the video, subscribe, and stay close. There are more stories like this one waiting.